Welcome, everyone. This is Scott Strode with Blue Chips Global and Postplay Media LLC. Back again here for another podcast. And today's guest, we have Evan Bonnaure from Washington and Jefferson College in Washington, PA. But first, let me remind you, we have the Interstate Shootout at Milan Park on June 13th. We already have 7 teams signed up. We also have, in the morning, we have an unsigned senior transfer and JUCO showcase for college coaches. And if you need info on that, contact me or contact Isaiah Francis, and I will post that info, that contact info, in the text in this post. But without further ado, let's introduce Coach Evan Bonnaure from Washington and Jefferson. Coach, welcome in.
Thanks for having me, Scott. It's a pleasure to be able to join the podcast.
Absolutely. So I followed you for quite a while and what you do, and I'm a big fan because you've pulled in some West Virginia guys and some guys I was really familiar with, obviously, and so kudos for that. And I know a couple of them have worked out quite well for you. So, but anyway, we'll come back to that here in a minute. But tell me a little bit about your basketball journey, where that started. Did you have a basketball in your crib when you were born? Did you pick it up when you were 12? Tell us a little bit how that started for you and how you ended up in the coaching game and got to Washington Jefferson.
Yeah, so for me, it started at a really young age. My dad was a high school coach at South Fayette High School, just a little bit south of Pittsburgh. So really from the time I was 4 years old, I was on the end of his bench and kind of growing up, going to his games and his practices and just being around his teams. And that's what really sparked my love for the game. Had a lot of really good mentors in the players that were older than me that he coached as I was growing up, and that really ignited everything for me. So from there, I was able to play for my dad in high school, which was a really fun time. My freshman year, we won the state championship in Pennsylvania, and just had a really good 4-year career there, and really enjoyed that experience. And then went on to play at La Roche University in Pittsburgh, Division III school just north of the city. Really enjoyed my experience there as well. It was a little bit up and down, early in my time there, but ended on a really high note. Really loved the people there, the coaches, the teammates, everything like that. So really, really enjoyed my 4 years there. And then, really once I was done playing, knew that coaching was something that I wanted to do. Was a little bit unsure at the time whether that meant going into teaching and being a high school coach or trying to pursue college coaching full time. I had done my undergraduate education for, secondary ed so that I could teach and coach. But really at the end of the day, just decided that I kind of wanted to dive into college coaching and, meet that challenge head on and go that route. So got really, really lucky actually through another kind of West Virginia connection. Mike Lamberti, the head coach at West Liberty University, is one of my good friends. We were high school teammates. During my senior year of college, when I was searching for graduate assistant jobs, he ran into Jeff Wilson, the head coach at East Stroudsburg, another top-level Division II program. And over the course of their conversation, he brought my name up, mentioned that I was trying to get into coaching, and was fortunate enough to accept a grad assistant job at East Stroudsburg University, which I feel extremely blessed to kind of have had that be my start in coaching because, just on a number of levels, I feel like it prepared me for, to be able to take the next steps in coaching. So over the course of my 2 years there, we were really, really good. My first year there, we won the PSAC championship, went to the NCAA tournament, and actually reached the Elite Eight of the NCAA tournament. So had a really good year where we were a top 10 team in the country for most of the year. And, first year in coaching, some people never get to experience that. And I was like, man, I've been doing this for 6 months and we're hopping on a chartered plane to South Dakota to play an Elite Eight game. And it was just a really cool experience, but really fortunate for my time there. Coach Wilson is, one of the active winningest coaches in all of Division II, and just did a really good job of preparing myself and our other GA to actually be able to coach. We weren't out there sweeping the floor before practice. Like, he gave us responsibilities and allowed us to make mistakes and, still be a part of it. So I felt like that prepared me really well for where I'm at today, and honestly, especially here, because we've kind of, transitioned to the same style of play that we had at East Stroudsburg. After that, was kind of unsure what I wanted to do next. Coming from being a grad assistant at an upper level Division II, there's a lot of different paths you can go from there. You can go the Division I Director of Ops route. You can stay in Division II. You can go to Division III. But for me, my heart was kind of in Western PA in Division III. That was my background. That was what I loved. That was what I always wanted to do. So from there, I took a job as an assistant at Allegheny College. I was there for about 8 months before COVID hit, and then just was ready for a little bit of a change. So late 2020, early 2021, accepted the job as the assistant here at W&J and have been here ever since. So it's been a really, really fun ride here. Really enjoyed it. We've had a ton of success. As you mentioned, there's a ton of West Virginia guys that have been a big part of that success. Just really enjoyed my time here and looking forward to keeping it rolling.
Yeah, it's I think it's interesting. One that I thinking back to what you mentioned there with your coach at East Stroudsburg, that's probably, I'm sure you realize this, how important it was, that he give you a leash, where you had some latitude there to actually coach and make mistakes and find some things that you could do well and find some things that maybe you had some weaknesses with. And I don't think that happens, probably enough, or it doesn't happen with everyone. I think a lot of guys are too afraid to fail and to let their assistants really grow like that. And so that says a lot for that, for that coach in particular. And the West Virginia, player thing, we mentioned ahead of time there. I know that's been big for you guys. I've always kind of kept track of Washington Jefferson, and I don't know. I went to basketball camp there when I was, I think, 15 years old. So I've always been kind of somebody that kind of watched what they were doing ever since then. But there has been that, it seems like there's, for quite a while, there's always been that West Virginia player flavor there. Let's talk a little bit about the guys you've got there right now, and we'll count Quentin Berlinski, come from Wheeling Central, technically an Ohio guy, I guess, but at least that's how he's listed. Let's talk about those guys, Cart, Plotner, Schramm, and Quentin a little bit, and tell us a little bit about how things are going for them right now, and what your expectations are going forward.
Yeah, so for us, really, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the West Virginia pipeline for W&J really started with our former volunteer assistant Brandon Staley. Started out as a high school coach in West Virginia, and then joined the staff here a year prior to when I got here, and he really did a great job of kind of building that foundation in West Virginia, recruiting guys from there, and it started. The first guy was Primo Zini from Trinity Christian, who had a really good career here. And then a few years later, J.R. Mazza, who was on the really good University High team with Caden Matheny and K.J. McClurg. And, J.R. had a great career here. I think his sophomore year, he was second in the country and made threes with over 100. Had a really, really good career. And then Logo Zervos was in that class as well, another Trinity Christian guy. Yep. And then, as you mentioned, the four we've got on the roster now, and, to be honest, they're four of the better players in our league. Just to kind of go through one by one, Nathan Plotner, he's a unicorn at this level. I mean, he is two-time reigning Defensive Player of the Year, averages nearly a double-double. I mean, he's going to graduate from here with 1,200, 1,300 career points, one of the top 2 or 3 leading rebounders of all time. He'll be first in blocks, top 2 or 3 in steals. Really just one of the best post players to ever come through this program, and above that, probably the lowest maintenance guy we have on the roster. Just a great kid who shows up, does his work in the classroom. He's one of the smartest kids we have. Just an absolute joy to coach, and really, kind of the anchor behind everything that we do. He's been a big, big reason for the success that we've had the last handful of years. Matthew Cart from Ravenswood, West Virginia. He'll be a senior this year as well. He's in the same class as Plot. Cart's one of my favorite guys that I've coached, just from the perspective of he's really competitive and he's really emotional. And I think that, for outsiders, sometimes they might watch him play and kind of wonder, what the attitude's like or things like that. It might not always come across in the best way for people that don't know him. But as someone that's been able to coach him for 3 years, it's impossible not to love that kid. Like, he is one of the 2 or 3 most competitive kids I've ever coached. I think that shows, and just the knack he has for making big plays on the court. I think this year in the championship, he was not having a good game. He might have been like 1 of 8 from the field, a handful of turnovers with 7 or 8 minutes left in the game, and then he scores 10 in a 3-minute stretch that pretty much wins us the game. And just that ability to kind of turn it on, I think, comes from his competitiveness. He wants it more than anybody that we have, and that shines through kind of in the plays that he makes in big moments for us. Next one, as you mentioned, Quentin Berlinski from Wheeling Central Catholic. Quentin is a kid we were really excited to get here. Came from a great high school program, had a handful of opportunities from Mountain East schools, but chose to come here because he's a great student, 4.0 student that really valued the education piece as much as the basketball piece over the course of the recruiting process. So we were really excited to get him here, and he's had a great 2 years to start his career. He's started 50 of the 55 games he's played in for us. He's one that, when you look at the makeup of our roster these past couple years, he's sacrificed a great deal for the betterment of the team. Last year and the year before, we had 7 guys average between 9 and 15 points a game, and 7 guys that scored over 20 in a game over the course of the season. Because of that, those 7 guys all probably could go a lot of other places in our league and average 18 to 20, but they give up a little bit of that individual success to be on a great team and to win some team accolades. And Quentin's been a big part of that. He's a guy that's just his first 2 years done exactly what the team needs on any given night. He could go somewhere else and score a lot more, but he's been really, really good in his role, and he's a guy that we expect to take even a bigger step forward, this year with the graduation of 2 of those top 7 guys off last year's team. He's capable of even more than he's done these first 2 years. I told him in his exit meeting this year, I think he could be the best guard in the league by the time he graduates, and that, for him to get to that point wouldn't surprise me one bit. So he's been really, really good for 2 years, and we expect him to even take a step forward next year.
Sure.
And then the last one, Parker Schramm, he was a freshman for us this year from Williamstown. Parker's another guy that was extremely well coached in high school by Scott Sorrow down at Williamstown. Comes from a really good high school program, really well coached, and you could see that, from day one of him in practice this year. Like, things just clicked, he picked things up fast, and he's a guy that we have really high expectations for next year. His role on court this year was a little bit inconsistent, and for him, that was unfortunate, because if this was any other year, he would have played a lot for us and he would have helped us. But, having your top 7 back, we were in win-now mode from day one this year. It's just a little bit hard to let freshmen play through growing pains, just normal freshman things. But Parker's a really good player that we have really high expectations for. And, to be honest with you, if we're able to sustain the level of success that we had this year again next year, a big part of that is going to be because Parker takes a big jump, and he's one of those top 6 or 7 for us.
Yeah, for sure. He's, probably going to instantly give you some real good depth there at the guard spots, with Quentin and Matt, I'm sure. which is big time. Kind of makes me think as you were talking. I'm kind of things like this, crazy thoughts like this roll through my head. How many and you have one of the more talented rosters on in your league. And I've talked to and even had on the podcast, a lot of other coaches in this league. What do you think? And I'm not saying this is going to happen or anything like that, but the comparisons between, so you're in, you're kind of in between PSAC and MEC land. How many guys at that level in your league in particular? How many guys are on that level that could translate to that? Because that's PSAC and I know a lot of people in West Virginia aren't super familiar with PSAC, but it's pretty big. It's pretty big time Division II sports in general in PSAC, and as well as MEC. How many guys do you see year to year that can play in that could really play, not just be on a roster?
I always have a hard time with that question because there's such a big gap between the top of Division II and the bottom of Division II, right? There's a huge difference between playing at Gannon or West Liberty versus maybe, the bottom couple teams in the PSAC or the Mountain East. And that's why, not to get too far off track here, but that's why, one of the things we always talk about with recruits is looking at the whole picture of the recruiting process, right? Not just getting a Division I offer and jumping on it, or maybe in the case of guys we're recruiting, getting a Division II offer and jumping on it, because there could be a kid from somewhere in West Virginia that gets 2 or 3 offers from bad Division I programs, and when they get that offer from West Liberty or Fairmont State, well, that's a million times better situation than going to a Division I program that's stealing his 8 wins and has poor facilities and a bad education. And I think, in some cases that's no different with what we're doing. There might be guys that we recruit that get offered by a handful of not so great Division II situations, and we feel very strongly with the value of a W&J degree, the resources that we have both from an academic and athletic perspective, the ceiling as far as being able to win conference championships and get in the NCAA tournament and win games like we did this year. We feel very strongly that the situation that we have to offer can rival a lot of those Division II situations. And so, we spend a great deal of the recruiting process talking to guys about, just look at the whole picture. So for us, that conversation starts with, we always say you have to choose school for school, right? So it's got to be a place where, the educational value kind of lines up with what you're looking for. And then, the second layer to that is the social aspect. We talk to guys about, when you're choosing a school, is this a place that, if you got hurt and had to miss a whole season, would you be happy there? Would you be comfortable? Like, could you still go to school there? Or, if basketball was taken away, would you want to leave and go home? Right? So those two things first and foremost, we say once those are covered, hopefully you have a group of 2 or 3 schools that you like, you feel comfortable with, and then basketball can be the tiebreaker out of those things. Right? So then you can start to look at whatever it may be that is important to you in the recruiting process, whether that's playing early, whether that's being on a great team, but really making sure that kids look at the entirety of the academic experience, the social experience, and the basketball experience, and not just, am I going to be able to post a committed graphic to a Division I school or a Division II school and get there and be in the portal in 6 months, right? So I know that kind of broke off into a tangent and went in a different direction, but all that's to say, I think realistically, I think any of our top 7 last year could have been on Division II rosters. I think we're in a little bit of a unique spot in that our top 7 last year are all going to leave here as 1,000-point scorers. So 7 guys on a team that score 1,000 points that are that accomplished is not normal. I think in a normal year, we probably have 2 or 3 guys that could play at a higher level.
Yeah.
But I think anytime, we won our first round NCAA tournament game. We're one of the last 32 teams standing. I think if you look at any team that's in the final 32 of Division III, they've probably got a good chunk of guys that could play at the Division II level, which, you see with the portal nowadays is no different. Most of the Division II NCAA tournament teams have guys that could play at the Division I level and are moving up
Sure.
because of NIL.
Sure. Yeah, that's and you mentioned at the beginning of that, the gap, and I think this is where people, there's levels within the level, and a lot of folks don't see that, can't see that, or maybe don't understand it, that just the difference within Division III between a bad Division III and a good Division III, or Division II, same thing. The difference is, I mean, night and day between, and I'm understating that grossly, to say it's night and day between the lower level Division IIs and the upper level Division IIIs, and then you get into NAIA, and it's the same thing, and a lot of people, whereas 30 years ago NAIA was it was it was WVIAC, where the MEC is now, and people thought of it as one step below Division I, and now a lot of I kind of catch a lot of parents and kids thinking it's like the lowest level, because it's not NCAA, and it gets so cloudy and kind of mixed up, and I think a lot of it is just social media and how people present it, when they're talking about it, or when they're getting offers, or whatever. But
And that's
go ahead.
I think it's just impossible to kind of bridge those gaps just from a resources perspective. At Division II, a lot of times there might be really good programs with 10 scholarships and really bad programs with 2 scholarships, and that's not to say that a great coach at an underfunded program can't overcome that, or a bad coach at a great program can't kind of underachieve, but that's a big difference and a big hurdle to kind of overcome. And I think at the Division III level, a lot of that is, it might not be scholarships or money, but academics, enrollment, those two things are at the forefront of everyone's minds these days. You see Division III schools closing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We're really fortunate that we're going in the opposite direction. Our enrollment's grown over the past few years. We're anticipating we had our largest freshman class ever last year. We're anticipating breaking that this year. And, just kind of the difference in resources makes it difficult for some places to compete and makes it easier for other places to compete, but that's just kind of things that kids have to navigate through the recruiting process, because they're oftentimes not going to change over the course of the program.
And some of the facilities, I had Coach Carley from Lebanon Valley, which I told him on air, that I thought they had maybe the nicest, one of the nicest arenas in any division. Maybe not the biggest, but one of the nicest, the coolest looking places I thought of anywhere from the first time I saw it. Some of the facilities that the Division III schools have are way far and ahead of a lot of the Division IIs. And the same with the Division IIs. There's so many of those. And I've described to people too, the overlap. There is a huge overlap between, the lower level Division Is and the upper level Division IIs. A huge overlap in really in talent and a lot of things. Everything, if you will, maybe other than NIL money. I don't know if that's how prevalent that is, but that stuff is real, and I think that's, like you said, getting those. Getting those offers isn't, always. It's just not always better. It's just not always a better. But it's got to be. You got to get some real. Really break it down to what, like you said, academics and the social aspects and all the other things other than basketball. You really got to take a real hard look at. And I know especially with West Virginia kids, there's a lot of times, they are Division III level players. They're getting, development, opportunities at the Division II level. And so the money a lot of times ends up being kind of, it's kind of
Yeah.
even Steven, so it's, but your opportunity to play, is at that Division III level, but like you said, sometimes it's the ability to post that, offer and that kind of stuff is,
Yeah,
is kind
because in situations where the money's close, it's hard to realize at 18 years old, and you're hopeful in a lot of cases that it's the parents putting it in the kid's ear.
yeah,
If the money's close and the value of the degree is not close, that's something that isn't easy for an 18-year-old to realize, but you hope that somebody can kind of get that across to them, because that's something that 5 or 6 years down the line, I think a lot of kids would wish they had realized when they're getting that first job and
yeah.
receiving their first paychecks.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then it's kind of moot, at that point. But, and I think sometimes, kids are kids. I know the way I thought about things when I was 18, and I'm sure you can remember as well. But, I'm not going to lie, there's some ego with parents as well, as far as what, as far as where their kids play, and that, unfortunately, that comes into the fold probably more times than what it should. But I know the parents have to give guidance, but they've got to put their ego aside, and when it comes to choosing schools for their kids, and let them go to the best the best fit. But it is what it is. Coach, let us know what, I always think this is an interesting question, because it's kind of crazy how people do things differently. But where do you recruit? How do you find a kid like Matt Cart, who's from the middle of West Virginia, not necessarily the middle, but from Ravenswood, who the rest of the world is nowhere West Virginia, and how does a kid like that drop into your lap? And Quentin Berlinski, I get that, he's down the street, but Plautner played for kind of a big time program here in West Virginia. But how do how some of these guys, have you found them on an AU circuit? Is it at an event, or do you get referrals from high school coaches, or how's all that work with your guys?
So first, for your viewers, I have to promise them that this is not a paid advertisement, but I'm going to give you a shameless plug here. The first time I saw Matthew Cart was at one of your showcases. So I promise Scott didn't pay me for that. That's the honest to God's truth. I saw Matt Cart at one of his showcases. But no, in all seriousness, for me personally, and I think this is different for every coach, right? I value evaluations with guys' high school teams infinitely more than in an AAU setting, in a showcase setting, anything like that. AAU showcases, prospect camps, things like that are phenomenal for us as coaches to be able to gather names, right? We can see a bunch of kids under one roof. It's convenient. For those purposes, it's great. I don't spend a ton of time recruiting AAU. We'll go to 2, maybe 3 tournaments a summer. We'll go to a handful of events like yours where we can see a bunch of guys under one roof. And that's great because we can come home from there and say, okay, we liked these 7 or 8 kids. Now we need to see them with their high school team to kind of get a feel for if they really fit, and go from there. So for me personally, I just feel like the evaluations with high school teams are a little bit cleaner. AAU, there's not much preparation, right? It's kind of different from team to team. You don't really have any idea if a kid can execute a scout or if they can, play at a high level when the other team is familiar with them and tries to take away their strengths, things like that. So AAU is, other events, they're great for name gathering, information gathering, but to really kind of get a feel for if a guy's going to fit with your program, I feel strongest about being able to see them with their high school teams. And then, sometimes it's dumb luck too, to be honest with you. Like we had, as far as Nathan Plautner, the first time I saw him, we just happened to have a bye on a Wednesday that was the same day as the high school event down at West Virginia State. I was like, you know what? I'll drive down there, watch games all day. It's a 3-hour drive, not too bad. And I think the fourth game I watched was Park South versus Huntington. And, you know, as I'm watching that game, I'm like, holy cow, like we have to have this kid, right? And, you know, just talked to Coach Fallon after the game, and it went from there. But, you know, for us, it's getting out to as many high school games as possible. A lot of times, as you mentioned, that starts with the best programs, right? There's certain programs that, you know, one, you know, because of their success, they're going to have players year in and year out. But two, for us, like, we value a lot. We place a heavy emphasis on getting guys from winning programs, right?
Yes.
At that point, you don't have to spend a ton of time building your culture. They're coming in, you know, having kind of lived it for 4 years of high school. So we want to recruit guys who won in high school because winning is contagious. So we kind of start with, you know, going to those high school programs that win year in and year out, and are well coached, and guys that are going to be prepared for the college level, and kind of branch out from there.
That's a great synopsis there as far as the winning programs. I think that's that I've been around that conversation with parents, with different people over the past 4 years, and I'll just tell you, I remember one time telling somebody, they said, "Why don't you?" I can't remember if it was a parent or it was probably a parent. They said, "Why don't you promote, you know, just talking about or evaluating or retweeting stuff from kids from Morgantown High School?" And I said, "Because I don't have to." And they said, "What do you mean you don't have to?" And I said, "Well, coaches know that they know to go there first. You know, they don't have to lean on me for referrals from there, and they have a coach that's very proactive with talking to college coaches and has he has a built-in network of that." I said, they don't need me to intervene and try to promote their guys. Like it's just there, you know, and there's just certain programs like that. It's just you know, and that's great. You know, I'm always willing to help, but that's the way it should be. You know, let's face it, and that's what you want. So you know, and people kind of get sour at, you know, hearing so many kids getting looks at certain programs, but you know, you just said it, like that's where everybody's going to look first, and you're probably the 13th coach that's told me that. Like they're going to look there first because they always got guys, they're well coached, usually, you know, really disciplined, usually, you know, fundamental in a lot of ways, and you know, they're just lower risk that, you know, to come on campus than what you know, a lot of other guys are. So
and I think it's more important at our level really than any other level, because, you know, for high school kids or parents watching, I don't know how familiar you are with NCAA rules, but, you know, like at the Division II level, at the Division I level, coaches can work with guys in the spring and the fall, you know, to some extent in the summer when they're not in classes. Right. You know, at the Division III level, outside of our season, which is, you know, October 15th until, you know, we lose in March,
right.
We're only given 8 days to be in the gym with our guys. Like,
yeah.
So for us, we just bump up our start date a little, and you know, October 1st we'll go like every other day until our official practices start. But what that means is, you know, from the time we lose in March until October 1st of the next year, we can't be in the gym with you, right? So for you to get better from year over year, for guys to improve and make the jumps that we need them to make for us to be good, you know, is self-driven. And for that reason, like that's a big factor in why guys from winning programs have so much success, right? All they've ever done is win. Why would we not think that they're going to get better in the offseason? Yep. Why would we not think that they're going to do the things that we need them to do, even if we're not there with them? You know, because that's all they've ever done.
Yeah, that's. I mean, yeah, it's culture. You know, it's the culture they came from, and that translates so well to, you know, a college program culture, and like you said, that there's nobody has to tell them in April, hey, you got to get to work. You know, you're healed up, you're rested, it's time to get, they know, they know I've got to get, I've got to add some bulk, I've got to get stronger, my lower body needs to get better. They already know, and they understand that. And like you mentioned, you have your interviews at the end of the year, those guys are going to take that stuff to heart. They're going to lock in and get it done, get those things done that they need to do. Because that's what they're used to, that's what they're used to. And let's face it, and I know some people don't want to hear this, but Matt Cart being one of the exceptions to this rule, and maybe Parker Schramm even, but guys that are coming from a Morgantown, a George Washington, a Parkersburg South, from a talent perspective, they're going to be more ready to play. At that level, they're going to be. I'm not saying 4A in West Virginia is equal to Division III in college. That's not we're not even close. But they're just going to be more ready to play because they've seen higher levels of talent night in, night out, and they're just more ready. Would you agree with that? Or
yeah, but I think it goes back to what we said earlier. It's kind of similar to college, right? Even within high school, there's levels. So, and I think like the reason you said the kind of exceptions to the rule, is the top of 4A going to produce guys that are ready for college? Absolutely, right? But then there's also probably just a handful of programs down in 2A or 1A. Like I'm sure there's a bottom half of the 4A teams, Williamstown or Wheeling Central, would beat most years.
Oh,
and that's why those guys are ready, right? So it goes kind of back to the winning programs thing, back to the levels within levels thing. But just being able to, kind of access to good competition, I'll say, regardless of what level that is or where that's at. If you have good competition in an organized setting like high school basketball, then that's going to be a great benefit to you when you get to college.
Yeah, for sure. Great points all around there. Coach, just kind of shifting gears here a little bit. What do you think, and this is a really, really loaded question, what do you think the direction of basketball, and I'm talking overall, other than NBA, what do you think the direction of basketball is going here? Now, we've seen this influx of international flavor and talent, come into the NBA. Are we kind of in for, an international player takeover from the top down? We've certainly seen it in Division I. I think if people didn't recognize that this year in the NCAA tournament, the influence and the influx of international players, how prevalent that is right now. I think you're starting to see a little trickle down into Division II. Is that what basketball is in for? And I think too. And correct me if I'm wrong. This is just my philosophy. I think we're kind of starting to We're starting to circle back maybe to what I would say more traditional basketball, because that's what I was used to 30 years ago, where we have more of a true point guard, and more of a post player type of style, rather than spreading everything out and 4 out and 1 in or 5 out or whatever. What's your thoughts on that? What do you think is happening right now with that international drive, to get to the United States and just and guys are trying to get in at any level. I know that from my own DMs, and you probably do too. Guys that are just looking for a spot, anywhere. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the talent perspective, whether it's international or guys from the United States, I think that's always just going to kind of go in waves, right? There's going to be cycles where there's a lot of international talent at the high major Division I level coming over to the United States. There's going to be waves of years where maybe there's not as much talent over there for guys to pick from. That doesn't affect us a ton. That's one of the areas where at Division III, it's different school to school. But for us, we just don't have very many scholarships available for international students.
Yeah.
So there's not much academic money available. I don't think we can't really get an international student on campus for under $30,000 a year. Most of them, I mean, how can you ask a kid to pay that? Most kids don't want to pay that much money. You know, over the years, Lindsley's had a couple really good players that we've recruited that we've liked a lot. And, you know, when it came to the end of the day, like the packaging aspect just wasn't competitive enough to be with those guys, which is not the case at all for us with, you know, with local guys. We package great for West Virginia kids, for Pennsylvania kids. It's just kind of the international thing. So for us, that's not something that really has affected us or probably will affect us, you know, very much. One thing that probably will be coming within the next few years that will affect us more is if the NCAA grants the 5 years of eligibility rule. I think that will be a big game changer at Division III if guys are given 5 years of eligibility to complete 5 seasons. Because for a lot of Division III schools like us, like, we don't really have graduate programs, right? We have a creative writing program, and now next year we're adding an education program. But no MBA, like none of the big master's programs that would allow us to keep guys for 5 years. So, you know, that would be kind of a bigger trend in both basketball and just the landscape of higher education. It'll be, you know, something that we're trying to navigate over the next few years so that, you know, not only we can not allow it to make us not competitive, but we can take advantage of it, right? Like, I think during COVID, you saw that a lot, where a lot of teams had fifth-year guys who, you know, were using their extra year of eligibility from COVID, and we didn't have that luxury, but we were still one of the better programs in the league over the course of that time. You know, just being able to kind of play younger guys and still win. You know, so that'll be kind of the next layer for us. If 5-for-5 eligibility gets passed, how are we going to navigate that, and, you know, what are we going to do to overcome that?
Is that something you want to happen, the 5-for-5? I kind of like it, but I'm afraid, my fear is, you know, they pass it, it's in there, and then, like the NCAA does, they just keep adding these little caveats and these little, you know, point A, point B, point C, you know, and it turns into, because that's just what they do.
Yeah.
And it turns into something that it was never intended to be in the first place, like NIL, and you know, and then we're back to, well, scrap that and let's start over. You know, and I like it, but at the same time, like, I don't have high hopes for it.
Yeah. You know, I think it's one of those things, if I had my choice, I would vote no. I don't really want it, just from the perspective of, you know, you look at, especially at the Division I and II level now, right, with the amount of guys that are in the portal and the amount of schools that are saying, you know, we're only taking 2 high school kids in this class because we're going to take 4 guys out of the portal, right? It's making it more difficult for high school kids to not only, 1, find the right fit in college, but 2, make an impact on the court when they get there, right? So I think what you'll see with 5 years of eligibility, it's going to be really, really hard for high school kids to come in and play right away on good teams, which is already the case, but I think that only takes it to another level, right? Like, we've got a couple freshmen coming in this year that we expect to make an impact. That would have been virtually impossible had our seniors this year had another year, because then again, we would have returned 7 guys that average double figures, and it's like, you know, what, do you want to come in and sit for a full year and develop, or do you want to go somewhere where you can play? And, you know, everybody has their opinions on that. I have mine, but at the end of the day, it comes down to what each kid wants, and if they want to play right away, and that's not what a program can offer, then who are we to tell them that they're wrong? Right? So, you know, I think it's something that is eventually going to happen, but I think, again, it's just similar to a lot of other things that have happened with NCAA rules over the past few years, just making the situations a little bit harder for high school kids, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, first on the list to me would be, let's not be bringing NBA players back down, you know, into NCAA programs. Like, I responded to a tweet, actually quoted and put it kind of upset. Somebody posted something about just whatever, I don't know, just college basketball in general, and somebody replied, hey, that's I don't remember exactly what they said, and there was responded with, you guys really be hating these kids, and my reply was like, they have what seems like unlimited eligibility. They get NIL, they get a free education. How on earth could anybody be, could any of this be hating on hating these kids? And it's like, what else do we have to do for, do we get, where do you draw the line? 10 years eligibility, because if they don't get 6, are we hating on these kids, because we're keeping them from getting NIL money for a 6th year, we have to draw the line somewhere, and at some point, people have to be appreciative of what the opportunity these kids got, because it's unprecedented. From a money standpoint, from just an opportunity standpoint, and I know it doesn't have a direct effect on your level, but there is an indirect effect that just log jams everything back down. And I know it's pretty safe to say, like, guys, those high level players, that are in Division III, like 20 years ago, it wouldn't even have been a second thought. Like, they would have been Division II players, MEC, West Virginia Conference, whatever it was called back then, or probably PSAC, whatever. Like, it's just, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but like, there's a constant push down, because, and it just continues because, like I said, now we're bringing back, and I don't mind guys putting their name in the draft and coming back. That's not what I'm saying. But guys that actually play and then come back, that's we got to draw. You know what I mean? Like, until we draw the line there, everything else is. You know what I mean? Like, everything else is really moot at that point. Like, until we got to draw some hard lines somewhere, and say, okay, this is it. And, they've loopholed the whole NIL deal, and it's not NIL, it's just paychecks. And if they wanted to cap that, they could, and that'd be the quickest way to, just pay everybody $100,000, and if you want to do NIL, do real NIL, and they could fix that if they wanted to, but I don't know that they will.
And the hard part with NCAA rules is that, situations at WVU versus the WNJ are so different, right? If you're, say, for example, you have a kid that's been out of high school for a while, you have a 25-year-old. If they can play at a Power 4 school and make $200,000, they should do that, right?
Sure.
Versus, we always tell guys coming out of high school, like, you're going to have a really good experience here. You're going to win a lot of basketball games. You're going to enjoy your time here. But what we're really trying to do is prepare you for the next step in your life.
Yep.
Right? It's about the next 40 years when you leave here, not the 4 years that you're here. And do we want kids that are 25, 26 trying to get eligibility to play Division III basketball? Or at that point, are we kind of putting them behind the 8 ball for the next steps in their lives as opposed to setting them up to be successful in those steps? Like, I don't know, but that's a question that should be asked, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is make sure that they're successful when they leave here. And, that situation looks a little bit different than the situations of guys at Power 4 schools, which are the ones that are being considered when these rules are made.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody's considering that, other than just throwing a bunch of money at them. Nobody's considering that at the upper levels. I mean, it's just, whatever. I mean, when it comes down to it, and I know it's the conference, presidents of the power conference schools that are calling the shots, and this is what they want, and this is what they got, and if they continue 10 years from now, half of those schools are going to be bankrupt. We're starting to see that already, just a few years in. But I don't know. I like I said, the 5 for 5 thing, I would have zero problem with if that was it. But again, I don't think it's needed if because that's obviously being designed for the upper levels. They're not keeping that in mind. For Division III, like that's not even a thought. They probably haven't even dissected that. What effect it's going to have there. But if and I'll go back to this again, if it was a true NIL. If NIL there wasn't the loophole that you could just gather all this money and then just divvy it out. The 5 for 5 would be fine with me, but that's just not it, and it's just not gonna stay to that status.
Yeah, it's kind of the Wild West at the upper levels right now, and feel pretty fortunate that we're able to win at the level that we do without having to deal with a lot of those things.
Yeah, it's. But I think it's even more kudos to you guys that are having success. When all that noise, even at the Division II level, there's. I'm sure the PSAC is the same at Division II level. There's money out there. There's money at some of these schools, and that noise is out there. That noise is out there with all the Division I stuff, and then the MEC and the PSAC stuff, where you've got schools that are given, not a bunch, but they're given money on top of scholarship, and you're still able to find the guys that are, not just good enough to play, but they're guys that fit your program and you're able to have success with. I think that's that kind of goes. I don't know. I think we kind of miss the mark with that, with kind of congratulating that part of it, because I think it's tougher for guys that are recruiting. Like you're down in the weeds with it, and kudos to you guys that are doing it, getting it done, having success. With, like I said, all the mess and all that noise at the other, with everything else.
Well, that's where I think this, we've been able to navigate this era in a way that's benefited us, right? I think we don't utilize the transfer portal much. I think we had one transfer on our roster this year. We would prefer to build with high school kids, but the way in which it's been able to benefit us is I feel like there are a lot of Division II schools, Division I schools that save so many roster spots for guys out of the transfer portal that we've been able to get high school players in the past handful of classes that maybe 10 years ago would have ended up at good Division II programs when those programs were bringing in 5 or 6 high school kids as opposed to 1 or 2.
Right.
So that's been a great benefit to us. Like I think there's no doubt, Berlinski and a couple of the Pittsburgh guys in his class, like 10 years ago, would have been at really high level Division II programs coming out of high school. But those programs are opting for the 22-year-old Division I drop down out of the portal right now, and that's opened the door for us to get some really good high school players, and I think that's been kind of a big part, of our ascent as a program too. This year with our win over Mount Union in the first round of the NCAA tournament, that was our program's first NCAA tournament win since '95, and only the third time since 2000 that our entire conference had won an NCAA tournament game. So basketball is getting better, in our conference in Division III, and I think a big part of that is because we're able to get really, really good high school players and keep them here too. That's a part of it too. Those are 3 guys in that class that could have easily left to go other places, but they've really enjoyed their experience here, both on court and off court, to the point where they don't want to leave, and that's a big part of kind of sustaining success as well. Yeah,
that's something I've kind of overlooked is the guys that stay long term. That's pretty huge. That means you're not just winning games, but your culture's good, your environment's good in practice, off the floor. All of those things come into play. Guys are happy with their academics, and where they're at there. So all that stuff comes into play. One last thing, and we'll turn you loose. But when you are recruiting guys, bringing guys in, are you recruiting guys to a particular system? To what you like to do offensively, defensively? Is there a certain kind of skill set, size, a certain things that kids can do that you're kind of recruiting to, or is it just, hey, Nathan Plotner is one of the best guys I can grab. I'm going to bring him in, and we're going to figure out what to do with him once he's here. How do you approach that?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, we play a little bit of a unique style. We press 40 minutes a game, full court defensively, and we play really up tempo on the offensive end. So,
Yep.
Try to find guys that fit that style of play isn't always the easiest, but it's very important that we recruit to that style, right? So, there will be exceptions to the rule. Maybe there's a big guard that can really score the ball but doesn't have the quickest feet, and, probably isn't made to play that system.
Yeah.
That's not to say we won't take those guys. We've had some of those guys and just have to be a little bit creative. When we first started playing this system back in 2021, our best player was someone that was similar to that, a big guard that could really score but wasn't super gifted athletically. And so we went to 5 guard lineups and we played fast, where he guarded other teams' posts and we played 5 guards and spread people out. Now this past year we had probably the 2 best post players in the conference, and we played 2 bigs at a time. We're positionally, we are malleable to the point where we can play 2 bigs, we can play 5 guards, whatever the talent on our roster dictates. However we're better, that's what we're going to do lineup wise. But as far as recruiting to a system, for us, it's being able to play fast. It's being able to get up 94 feet and guard, and really get the tempo of the game up, because we feel that style of play, that tempo, all those things. If we're able to control the terms of the game, we feel pretty confident that we're going to win.
Yeah. So two things you do, recruit to that style, that philosophy, but you're flexible enough that you can fit a good player in. Yeah, and I think the key thing is, and you mentioned several times there in just a few seconds, is the operative word there is guard. Guys that can guard. And like you said, you might have to take that bigger guard, maybe guard a small forward, big forward, whatever. And but the main point is you got to be able to guard. And I think you think back with when that style first came about, with the 40 Minutes of Hell with Arkansas in the 90s, and Rick Pitino when he came into Kentucky, is they were able to do that as well. It doesn't matter who they put on the floor, everybody had to be able to. There was times when Arkansas would play with 2 6'11" guys, but they could still play full court, 94 feet, and press the hell out of everybody that they wanted to. So there was always a way to mesh that into what you need it to be. But the bottom line is, guys got to be willing to guard.
Yeah, and that's the operative word right there. Because I was just going to say, when we evaluate high school kids, especially, we don't necessarily put a ton of stock into how good we think they are defensively. We put a ton of stock into their willingness to guard, their want to, that sort of thing. Because we feel confident, we spend 75% of our practice time on our defensive stuff, whether it's full court or half court, right? We spend way more time on our defense than on our offense. We feel confident that we're going to be able to coach guys to guard the way that we want to. But it starts with that willingness, that 1-2, that kind of just general edge as a basketball player to be able to do what we're asking them to do, right? Because you can't be soft and play this style where you're going to get beat. So really just kind of that toughness, that edge, that 1-2, that willingness to guard, that competitiveness where guys value that side of the ball because they know it's equally as important to winning. That's kind of the things we look for. And I think I'd put Matt Cart in that category, as someone that we recruited that way. Matt was the biggest player on his high school team, right? As a 6-foot guard. So I'm going down to Ravenswood and watching them play, and a lot of times they're playing 2-3 zone and he's standing at the bottom of the zone. And it's like, how can you even evaluate if this kid can guard, right? But you watch his overall competitiveness and you're like, this kid wants to win more than anyone out there. Like, if I tell him he's got to get up 94 feet and guard, he's going to get up 94 feet and guard because he wants to win. And that's, just kind of an example of how that evaluation process unfolds for us.
Yeah, I got to know Matt. Matt and one of my sons played a season of AAU basketball together, and Matt did as much coaching, or maybe more, than the actual coach. He's just so outward. I mean, so vocal, and not in a bad way. Kids respected him and they responded to him. And a lot of times he would mix in a little humor, here and there, but he was so he was fun. He was a fun kid to be around, a fun kid to to kind of watch in those spaces. But in the last time the last time I saw him play in person, he hit. I think this was against my middle son, when he was probably, I don't know how old he would have been. But anyway, Matt hit a buzzer beater. We took Ravenswood down to the wire, our high school team did, and Matt hit a buzzer beater, probably I think a 15-footer at the buzzer to win it for Ravenswood. So that was the last time I saw him. So, all those things that you're talking about him, it resonates with me, and I've already, I've kind of already seen that from him.
He's got a tendency to try to, as you were just talking about, to play coach and officiate sometimes. Sometimes we got to reel him in and get him to focus on doing one of those a little bit, but that's why he's, like you said, he's got a knack for making big shots. He hit some huge ones in our conference championship, and then he came back a week later and hit a game-tying 3 with a minute to go against Mount Union in the first round of the NCAA tournament. He just makes winning plays because he's a winner, and that's what he does. And through all the ups and downs, we love him. Yeah,
for sure. He's an interesting kid. Would you say, I'll hit you with one more question here before we wrap it up. Talking about when you're going out to like you just mentioned about going to watch Matt play, one of the things I've kind of always told players and parents is, if a coach is going to make an effort, especially an effort to come to West Virginia and watch you play, they kind of already know you can play offense. If they're coming to the gym to watch you play a high school game on a snowy Tuesday night or whatever, they kind of already know you can play offense. They're coming to watch everything else. Would you, kind of say that's somewhat accurate, or, are you sometimes going to a gym to just see anything you can see?
I think it's, like we talked about, going to kind of see their compete level in person, right? Is this a kid that we think is tough enough and competitive enough to help us? And then getting to see in person, is this a kid that fits, right? Or is this a kid that's maybe a good player that isn't quite good enough for us to try and fit a square peg in a round hole that would be better somewhere else? So, being able to evaluate fit in person, and then being able to see toughness, competitiveness, how they interact with their teammates, with their coaches, all those sorts of things are, things that we watch, and I think things that can tell you a lot about a kid and how they're going to translate to when you get them on campus.
Yeah, and I think the tough thing for people to probably get, and probably the toughest part of this for kids and parents, is there are times when you'll be evaluated, you might even have some contact, and the guys on the coaching, on the college side, figure out you're not a fit. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad player or anything like that, but there's just certain time, and I'm sure you've seen this, where a guy says, well, I'm 6'3", and you get there and he's 5'11", and or they're 40% three-point shooter, and you get there and you're like, nope, you're not, and so there are times, that I'm sure you've experienced this more than once and several times, where you have those, you have those interactions maybe, and you just figure out at some point, like, that's they're just not a fit, and that's a tough thing for, I think, some kids to understand and realize, and because I hear that a lot from parents, like, hey, we talked to this coach, and then they talked to us for a couple of weeks and come and watched, and then now they won't talk to us, and it's like,
And that's
no.
where for us we value being very honest throughout the recruiting process, and we really hope that we get that in return from kids, right? So that's across all different topics, right? Like there was a kid very local to us my first year here that we recruited hard and thought would be a great player for us, and then at the end of the process he got offered by Shippensburg, who at that time was at the top of the PSAC, and we were the first people to tell him, like, look, that's a top 2 PSAC program right now, like, we want you, but you should probably take that opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? Versus kids that might get offered by a bottom 2 PSAC program, and we say, we think our situation's better. But that's just one topic of
Sure.
Areas where we try and be honest with kids. Like, I think another one, you see a lot of Division III programs have rosters, 30, 35 guys, and play a ton of JV games. And, I think certainly from an enrollment standpoint, a lot of schools would like to do that. One of the reasons that our roster is a little bit smaller is because we're really honest with guys in the recruiting process. Like, if we don't think you're going to come in and play as a freshman or sophomore, we're going to tell you that, because we don't want you to get here and it'd be a different situation than what you expected, and then you go into the portal, right? So there's going to be guys that we recruit that we say, hey, we expect you to come in and from day one compete and potentially make an impact. And there's going to be other guys that we recruit where we sit in this exact room on their visit and tell them, we really like you. We think you can help us down the road.
Yeah.
But we see that probably being 2 or 3 years away, and you're going to have to work for it and be okay with that. If this is the situation that you want to choose. And, all we ask in return is that guys give us the same level of honesty throughout the recruiting process, right?
Yeah.
We're in February and Fairmont State offers you and you feel like that's what you want to do, like, just communicate that with us. We'll be understanding, but give us that heads up so that we're not sitting there in the middle of March, like, okay, what's he thinking? What's he going to do? For us, it works better both ways when, we can be as honest with guys as possible and we get that same in return. And I think that's a big reason why we've had very, very few guys enter the portal over the last 5 years. Maybe only one guy that's played at all for us, and then a handful, maybe 2 other guys total. But I think a big part of that is because we're honest with guys throughout the recruiting process, and we want them to know the situation that they're walking into and, what it's going to be like when they get on campus. And I think that is just kind of a huge part of the process that I think sometimes goes underappreciated, undernoticed for recruits.
Yeah, the honesty factor is a funny one, because it's players and parents want they want the honesty from the college coach, but they don't always want to accept it, when they get it, and sometimes they have a real hard time being honest themselves as far as. So that's I'm sure you realize by now that's a pretty slippery slope, and and I do think in large, I think most coaches, most programs try to be honest with people. I know there's some that don't. I know that for sure, but it's not an easy thing for some of us. Well, some of not me, but some parents, some players to handle and be honest back. But that's part of it, and all that stuff kind of comes to light at some point.
Yeah, because we could. I mean, any kid that we recruit, obviously, we think is good enough to be a part of our program. So we could easily tell them all that they're going to have a chance to come in and compete and probably bring in 15 a year, and our admissions team would love us. But that's not, it's a big decision for the kids and families as much as it is for us. And we want to make sure that, they have all the information they need to make the best decision and understand the situation they're walking into, because it's not beneficial to us or them to have guys here that are unhappy or don't want to be here.
Yeah, for sure. That's I think that's the toughest part, is
because like you said, a lot of sometimes there's hurt feelings involved. I think I can come in and play there. I think I'd be a really good fit and I can help. And it's like, well, if you come in and you're one of our best guys, we're going to play you. Even if we told you it's going to take you 2 or 3 years to get on court. There's no doubt about that. But where we're projecting you, is probably 2 or 3 years down the line. And, that, like you said, sometimes that can lead to hurt feelings, because I think on the surface, some people think the recruiting process is all schmoozing and trying to tell people what they want to hear to get them there. And certainly that's a part of it for some recruiting processes. But I think it's more valuable when you get that level of honesty that, this is what we actually think, and this is what we envision for you. And, we hope that you like that, because we would really like to have you here. But if you don't, it's about what you want out of the process. So we can't control that.
Yeah. And I think people, and I mean, they have to, like you said, they think it's just schmoozing, and the coaches should constantly be in contact and check up on them every day. Like, I hear all this stuff, and when it really should be, the other way around. There should be, and this is one of the things I try to teach and really promote with kids and parents, is you got to be proactive in this process and take the first step, and you're the one that has to take it upon yourself to maintain that relationship, and let them tell eventually, so you can move on and you can be more efficient in your process. But sometimes that falls on deaf ears, and they just don't want to hear that part of it. But whereas, like you said, I think there's a lot of misconception of how that recruiting process goes and should go at any level, so.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there's going to be really, really good players that we chase. We had to chase Plotner for a while before we got him committed. But at the end of the day, most of the time, especially at the upper levels of Division III, it comes down to mutual interest, and you just want to see that interest reciprocated on both sides over the course of the process. Yeah,
for sure, Coach. Hey, Coach, we're an hour and 12 in, and perfect spot to wrap it up. Man, I appreciate you coming in. That's a ton of good perspective and information, and point of view of from a coach's standpoint, where how all this recruiting stuff goes. So if players and parents don't get anything out of this, then it's their own fault. But man, I appreciate you coming on, and obviously best wishes to you. I'm a fan forever, and if you need anything from us, you absolutely have the autonomy to reach out.
I really appreciate you having me. This was a lot of fun, and look forward to seeing you at a lot of more events and high school games in West Virginia.
Yes, sir, and we'll be getting you the invites to the rest of our events for this year, and my guy Isaiah will be right on that, and we'll hope to see you soon.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.